Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, February 6th, 2025. Time for another show. Time to reinvent the world and I guess the wheel, as long as we're reinventing things all over again. You know, the America you went to sleep in yesterday. I don't know. Maybe it's here. Maybe it's not. The show's here for now, so we continue on and have lots to catch up on in terms of other things that Elon Musk and the Lost Boys wrecked overnight. I don't think international affairs got any worse. They must have taken a break. Trump took a break from ruining international affairs, although actually his people spent all of yesterday trying to walk back his Gaza plans, which is not something you can do. The watchword here, you can't walk back own. When you say the United States is going to own Gaza, I mean, there is a figurative sense in which people say that. That is, you might own the problem, perhaps. You know, maybe we're going to be the ones responsible for keeping the peace and rebuilding things. I mean, that would be insane all by itself. A terrible plan and unworkable and foolish to even suggest. But, you know, that's not what he means. If there's one word in all of the statement that Trump actually gave that day that I am positive he understands, as in the same sense that we understand it, it's the word own. I mean, that's one of his favorite words. And one of his favorite things to do is to own things. Anyway, or pretend he does. So, that hasn't changed, but yeah, they're trying mightily. They have to. I mean, what else are you going to do? It's an insane thing that he suggested. So they spent all day saying, no. That's not what he meant. We're doing something else. And then, of course, you know, by the middle of the night, he was back on Truth Social saying it all over again, and we're going to own it. That, although it changed slightly, it was, on day one, it was maybe there would be U.S. troops on the ground, and they would be the ones possibly responsible for removing all the Palestinians from Gaza. And then, of course, leveling it. I mean, you can't walk that back either. We're going to own it. We're going to level it. Which he tried to make it sound like a good thing. We're going to make it nice and smooth. It's very jagged right now. That's the problem with Gaza. We're going to smooth it out. We're going to go around with a giant emery board. California has a giant emery board, and they're not turning it on, and they're not helping anybody, but I'm going to send the military. You know, this sort of thing. Anyway, walking it back seems ridiculous. And then last night he was, like I said, Truth Social posting that once again, we were going to own it. However, it was going to now maybe be Israel will hand over the keys. Israel will give it to the United States after the fighting is done. That way we won't have to send any troops. I think he realized that was maybe dumb. People didn't like the idea of sending troops there. But we're going to let Israel do all the fighting, which, you know, they're going to do. And but then they'll give it to us, which I think was also maybe a little bit of a demotivator for Israel. But I don't know. Anyway, lots of loose ends yet to be tied up on that one. But it seems so ridiculous, it's hard to even speculate. So anyway, by the way, today's random country generator tells me Tanzania. Tanzania is the people to have an eye on today. I think it's a low percentage play. I should start a new betting site. That seems to be making millions of dollars, billions of dollars. Betting sites, you can bet on whether or not the odds, I'll give you odds whether or not the random country generated by the random country generator is really going to be threatened with an invasion inside of the next 24 hours. Something like that. I don't know. And then somehow large amounts of wealth will be transferred to me, and that'll be it. I think that's what's going on out in Silicon Valley. I happen to see that people are chattering about that. I guess one of the kingpins, I guess, or a guy who imagines himself one of the kingpins of Silicon Valley. I guess he must imagine himself that way. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said this. But it was, let's see, John Shedletsky. I had to look him up. John Shedletsky. He doesn't look like he's old enough to have invented anything important, but young guys do this work. Silicon Valley built the modern world, he says. Why shouldn't we run it? I guess that's by way of excuse for Elon Musk walking into government departments and rearranging everything. The person who found this tweet and screen capped it and moved it over to Blue Sky, which is not really something I appreciate very much, by the way. It does bring the news here. There is that. But anyway, Adrian Daub, who writes, 2025 will go down as the year when the subtext became text, which is, I guess, a $10 way of saying the quiet part out loud. Better summarized, I think, by Brendel, who many of you likely follow on Blue Sky, Brendel Board at Blue Sky, who says every one of these guys thinks they're Oppenheimer mixed with Andrew Carnegie, and they own something called Splort.com that got bought by Boozoo. And that really kind of sums it up. As it turns out, John Shedletsky's contribution to building the modern world is something, if you have preteen kids or had preteen kids in the last 10 years, let's say, you might be familiar with the world-changing system known as Roblox. It's the kids' favorite game for teenagers and preteens who aren't old enough to stay up all night playing, I don't know, Call of Duty or some massive online combat game. They play Roblox or Minecraft, essentially, instead. So not even as useful as a burrito taxi, this guy. But why shouldn't he run it? After all, he's a titan of the universe because probably, like most of these guys, a Chinese company said, I don't know why Americans love this, but they're crazy for it. Let's buy it. And you build half of it and then sell the rest, sell the whole thing to the Chinese and run away and say, I'm a genius. That's the play. That's the world building. Greg Dworkin is here collecting information from around the country and around the world, and Connecticut as well. And let's chime in. What else could possibly be going wrong? Good morning, Greg.
Hi. What else could possibly be going wrong in the U.S. and Connecticut?
Yeah, and Canada.
Separate from the U.S.
Yeah.
Connecticut should become the 51st state. I think that's Trump's new position.
Connecticut. They're going to combine the two of you.
So, Radley Balco tries to sum up what's been going on here. He looks at Trump campaign promises and rhetoric and the reality. And sort of interesting, for example.
I love reality.
His voters said Trump will end American imperialism. That's why we're voting for him. So he vows to take over Greenland, the Panama Canal, Gaza, Canada, and Connecticut.
Northern Mexico.
Trump will take down tech elites while Trump gives Elon Musk your social security number and your financial records. And in regard to that, it turns out that when Musk and his 19-year-olds invaded Treasury, and by the way, today they're on NIH duty, but today or yesterday or last week or whenever they did it, because he hasn't been in president all that long, President Musk, they put a backdoor in the software that controls all the taxpayers' money.
Mr. Potato Head, backdoors are not a secret.
Right.
Yeah, but
an inexperienced
Elon
developer, says Brendan Nyhan, is implementing hidden payment blocking capabilities in the federal government's $6 trillion payment system. While the very experts who understand the systems are being pushed out and the teams responsible for investigating security breaches are being disbanded. What does that sound like? Greg Sargent writes, the most senior career official at Treasury was purged after protesting the access that Doge officials had secured. Why would that have happened if this were an innocent expansion of a previous process, as they claim?
Yes, that's
and
the
here
new
are
position.
Some other unanswered questions, and he lists some. But Treasury claims Doge's access to coded data is read-only, but as Ron Wyden points out, that doesn't answer another question. What does Doge intend to do with the data? Wyden says his office is investigating this, there is some pushback from Democrats on this, but having access to the country's money by 19-year-old somethings are not a great idea. As far as how Gaza is going, this is from Oritz, just to give you an idea of how it's being received there. Impractical, incomprehensible, illegal. Trump's traps Netanyahu and sows chaos with U.S. takeover plan for Gaza. His plan for the Gaza Strip that includes the relocation of 2 million Palestinians isn't logical or viable. Whether it's an imperialist tantrum, an actual out-of-the-box initiative, it doesn't matter. There's really no way to endorse, refute, or even examine it.
Yeah.
It's just stupid, in other words.
Yes, I was curious what the reaction was going to be, and I still haven't poked around enough to find video of. Is there more reaction from Netanyahu? Do they ask him afterwards?
No,
hey.
He refused to answer questions. And and
I
what's
didn't realize
interesting?
that. No wonder there's no video.
It's the usual Republican two-step. Republicans defend it.
One step. Yes.
And this is the part where you step back and say, look, I get that everything isn't perfect, but this isn't the way to fix it. Whereas Republicans are saying, good, it's about time. Everything was static. He needs to shake things up. And while he's doing that, the pushback from allies like Egypt and Jordan, who were just gobsmacked because he wants the Palestinians to move there. And they push back hard.
So did a lot of people.
And so Trump says, well, we're not really doing this like you are reporting it because you're reporting it wrong.
In what you should be reporting,
but
correction
that's his way
everyone
of pushing
loves
back
it.
and saying, okay, I screwed up. I got to walk it back.
Interesting. I did see one of his other quotes, in true Trump fashion, is he gave the quote to somebody. Everyone loves the idea.
Yeah, well, he always says that.
You can't even find people in his administration who are willing to say,
You probably
the
didn't
real
know
plan
this,
is
but
what he
until
said.
I came along, you probably didn't know there was this thing called the Middle East. But what I learned,
people didn't know this.
But I learned that it's really complicated.
Yeah. Well,
I'm the first one to discover it's really complicated there.
Yeah, and of course, that's something he said before, right? He put Jared in charge of it, and then it wasn't really working out, and he was like, "It's very complicated." And something else recently too he does this all the time. Oh yeah, right. I'm going to lower your prices. Oh, that turns out to be really complicated. Yeah.
So Navarro and some of his other acolytes are, you got to live through some pain, and then it'll get better because this is all good because in the long run it's going to be great.
They probably said, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. And then somebody said,
something like
but
that.
There's no eggs.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Right.
So, all right. Well, oh, yeah, right. Peter Navarro he's alive. And he's back.
And he's out of jail.
Yeah, and he's not in government, so he can say whatever he wants. But he was saying whatever he wanted when he was in government, too.
Right. So Jen Rubin is writing about the moment, the things that are going on, and writes, while some Democratic senators continue to vote to confirm utterly unfit nominees, the pro-democracy response has improved markedly in recent days. Most importantly, well-targeted lawsuits have at least temporarily halted Trump's efforts to unilaterally erase birthright citizenship from the Constitution, usurp Congress's power of the purse by freezing federal funding. Other suits have been filed to prevent Elon Musk and his band of cyber whizzes from sucking up.
It's too nice.
Is that like Cheese Whiz? From sucking up highly sensitive information from the Treasury Department, reverse pump Schedule F decree, undo anti-trans edicts, halt collection of names of every FBI employee to work on January 6th related cases, and stymie the firing of career federal employees in contravention of the law. These are all lawsuits that have been filed already. So, again, we talked about Thursday. Where are the lawsuits? And on Monday, how come we haven't seen the lawsuits? It's Monday. You can start filing them. Well, they did.
Yes.
As soon as the courthouse opened on Monday, they started filing this stuff.
Right. So now it's Thursday again, and people say, where are the decisions in the lawsuits?
Actions to reverse purges of inspectors general, career FBI agents, and employees deemed to have worked on DEI are also gearing up. Meanwhile, Trump's accomplished practically nothing on two big promises: his attempt to enact consumer tax, that is to say tariffs, on goods from Mexico and Canada was met with a storm of protest. After phony concessions, Trump backtracked. And while he staged showy immigration raids, the results have been meager. Arresting more people inside the United States and allegations of immigration violations means they need to be held somewhere, and significant space constraints in Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and federal court orders forbidding indefinite detention have forced the agency to release some of the arrested in the roundups rather than hold them until deportation. So they round them up for show. Kristi Noem puts on a vest and gets, some Fox News clips, and then they're let out. So 95% of what Trump does is for show.
And it's not a good show.
Except because he looks like somebody who should be in the Department of Defense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think he does not. But
there are people who are doing damage while this is happening, even though it's mostly for show. But, the Democratic response, the response from Democrats, needs to understand that a lot of this stuff is for show. So protest the ICE and immigration movements, but don't go nuts about it because mostly it's not happening.
That's a good thing. But yeah, the show is equally important on the other side. And by the way, the protest turnouts, I mean, there's lots of photos and video available now making the rounds on social media. So for people who are tuned in, and I don't know if the nightly news is showing it very much, but a lot of people we owe a lot of thanks to for showing up and making noise outside. And that's what's going to be necessary now and for the foreseeable future. Right.
Unelected Musk, the embodiment of the weird tech bro, is not a popular figure. Only 39%, Jen Rubin writes, approve of his performance and 53% disapprove. Since 2016, his net approval has nosedived from plus 29 to minus 11. Several developments this week suggest Musk is a vulnerability for Trump. As reporting from the Washington Post and others confirm, Musk and company have been put on notice of the likely illegality of their actions. Their blithe contempt for the Constitution gives weight to warnings that he's out to wreck the government and subvert democracy. Internal legal objections have been raised at the Treasury Department, Education Department, AID, USAID, General Service Administration, Office of Personnel Management, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the White House Budget Office, among others.
The Weather Service. I mean,
really, NOAA, and today NIH. Government officials are warning us that Musk is attempting to operate as a strike team outside typical agency rules. Yes. The Post report observes specific concerns include the terms of deferred resignations Musk's team is offering to purge civil service, which experts say runs afoul of federal spending law, and whether Musk staffers will use Treasury's payment system, remember that backdoor, to reverse spending that has already been approved.
Now they can do it from their phones. They don't have to be there.
So in addition, reminding voters that he's rampaging through government without clearance and in potential violation of numerous statutes and regulations serves both to highlight the growing constitutional crisis and taunt Trump, who's in charge here, you or Musk. President Musk is, not you.
Right.
Some political strategists surmise that Trump's portray as a feeble figurehead will encourage a falling out between the two. Moreover, the fight over privacy and fear of monkeying around with critical financial information now has made clear to voters it's not about some anonymous government bureaucrats. This is your data, your finances. And when Musk tries to turn off the spigot to federally funded daycare, life-saving medical research, you're the ones that are going to get hurt. FAFO, in other words. What will Musk do with all the data? That's a question even the legacy press can't ignore.
Yeah. Well, this sucks.
Right. So Democrats haven't used all the tools available to them, just as a contrarian contributor, Norm Ornstein, advised Democratic senators to use every legislative tool available, reviews unanimous consent, force quorums, etc. Indivisible co-founder Ezra Levin exhorted the crowd to demand Democrats shut down the Senate. If activists can push elected Democrats into action, the Musk-Trump steamroller may grind to a halt. And if they can just follow the lead of litigants and Democratic protesters, Democratic politicians might do some real political damage on Trump and demonstrate that they, not he, have ordinary Americans' interests at heart. So this is more than messaging. You just can't, this is just business as usual. You can't. John Fetterman's not the lead here. AOC is.
Okay.
Jamie Raskin.
Yeah, that's
people
nice.
like that. You have to listen to what they're saying. Oh, by the way, the fact that they're like 30 years younger than the people who really don't get it is really becoming a big deal.
Yeah, well, it's good news that things are shaking up and that some of the roadblocks that are supposed to be thrown up in the path of this thing is actually happening.
Right, and whether it's the lawsuits, as we talked about, don't just throw up your hands and say, oh my gosh, nothing's being done. A lot's being done, just not enough because it hasn't reversed everything and won't reverse the election results. But a lot's being done.
Yep. So, all right, well, we're grateful for what is going on. The lawsuits are moving. There's every indication that, the things you thought that they would do about the lawsuits, like ignoring them, are happening too. But you kind of have to demonstrate that this is not working and before you get the bulk of the population on board, if you ever get the bulk of the population on board with doing something, I don't know, different, more intensive, perhaps.
Right. So Radley Balco finishes off Trump's campaign promises and rhetoric. Trump will protect free speech.
Oh, okay.
LOL. Not even worth commenting on.
Right.
Trump will end DEI. Well, hope it was all worth it. Because that's the only thing that he's actually accomplishing.
Yeah, in the form of covering up plaques honoring women or people of color in certain hallways.
Changing language. Oh, by the
good
way, speaking of changing language and deleting stuff that really ought not to be deleted, did you know?
Sure.
Marco Rubio is not only
yes,
Secretary of State,
right.
not only now runs USAID, he's now in charge of the National Archives.
Yeah.
And that's bad.
He's the Mick Mulvaney of this season.
Well, that's bad because that gives permission to delete stuff that shouldn't be deleted.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how far they take it. The ultimate use of that leverage is, I mean, what can they erase? Can they change vote outcomes from Congress? Can they erase a judge's appointment to the bench? I don't know. I mean, they can erase it. I don't know what it'll do because I know this guy's a judge. He's been a judge for 10 years and I'm the guard and he comes in and I recognize his face. What am I going to do with, you say it never happened and it was a hallucination for 10 years? That doesn't work.
Right.
But some
Sam
other
Stein
things,
tweets
maybe.
an actual legit siren warning. The National Advisory General Medical Sciences advises that its council meeting scheduled for today has been postponed, basically because of Doge. It's the second largest institute at NIH, and many grants now will go unrewarded. This science advisory committee has supported the work of 97 Nobel laureates. So
those guys suck.
They're screwing with stuff, with medicine and science, and the nature of the universe, and not good.
No, they don't understand that stuff. They work in software, and they don't understand what happens when you have like physical, lab work going on something, and you just say, just don't do the things that you're supposed to do at the time you're supposed to do them. Pause everything, and everything falls apart, and the experiment is ruined, and development of some important cure is wrecked or set back by years.
Right.
They just don't understand that.
So between now and the break, which is coming up in about 4 minutes, let me just go over two topics briefly. The New York Times being the New York Times on the one hand, and conservatives being surprisingly reasonable about some things, with caveats, of course.
Sure.
The New York Times being the New York Times, this is their story. So Israel looks at Trump's Gaza proposal and his press conference with Netanyahu and says he's boxed Netanyahu in, and it's the report, the proposal was made up on the spot, has no basis in fact, makes no sense, satisfies no one, gets everybody angry. It's a great recruiting tool for ISIS and Al-Qaeda because it cements that U.S. imperialism is real.
I guess that's true.
It does no good and does a lot of bad. This is Haaretz and the Israelis reporting. New York Times, Trump's Gaza notion sets off democratic infighting.
We can't agree on whether or not to start a war, huh?
I mean, they're talking about the stuff we talked about a week ago. The Dearborn people and the uncommitted folks, ought to be ashamed of themselves. Oh, my God, look at that democratic infighting. It's ripping the party. No, it's not.
Well, it's not.
When you go and you look and see who actually voted for Trump, a lot of Republicans did. It's just that you had swayed them and persuaded them to vote Democratic or sit stuff out for a while. Then they went back to voting Republican. You want to castigate them? Go right ahead. Be my guest. They deserve it. There are Trump voting people in places like Michigan who still think that this Gaza proposal is a great idea because it's disruptive and disruption is good. In fact, they had a quote from somebody who said, I hope something good comes of it. Are you from Gaza? Oh, no, actually, I'm from Lebanon.
Oh, yeah, well, there's that.
It's not my land. I really don't have a stake in it. Okay, well, thank you so much. I guess you couldn't find anybody else who thought it was a good idea, so you stuck this guy in the story. James Ogby, a member of the Democratic National Committee and a founder of the Arab American Institute, was unsparing toward those who advocated a protest vote. There was a need to recognize the danger of Trump, and some folks in my community, some hustlers, were deliberately deluding themselves and others into thinking this was actually going to be a protest vote. It was a vote for suicide. They were helping to drive the car off the cliff and taking the community and the country with them. I don't mind protests. I'll never forgive them for not protesting Republicans. I've said that countless times. But don't tell me this is a nonpartisan, true from the heart protest when you only protest Democrats.
It's certainly an indication that there's some ulterior motive driving the agenda. Because, I mean, now what would be the excuse for not protesting? Republicans
right.
Who are saying, let's pave Gaza.
Yeah, the whole thing's a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, well, it is. It's and here I think there are some people who had some possibly individuals who had some very genuine feelings about the way things ought to be done,
and they were real,
but they were being driven.
They
I think
to speak, and they have the right to speak, but they don't have the right to speak at Democratic meetings where they think they're going to take over the stage to speak. It's not how it works,
unless you're Elon Musk.
And if you want to protest, you can protest, but understand what you're doing. That's all.
Yeah. Well, that's always been an issue for protesters of all sorts and people who just don't have much experience with the way things work. Whatever it is that has motivated them to action, it's motivated them to action late in the game, and they don't know what came before, and they just figure, I don't know, if I'm loud, something will happen. But they also, very likely are being handed angrier than they are talking points from somebody who we don't know who they are or where they came from or what their ideas are.
I mean, if you succeed, then you only weaken the people who are going to help you, and if you fail, then you set your cause back. So think carefully about what you're doing and why.
Right. And of course, the threat of what Trump could do in this area was so enormous. Even if you don't think, all right, well, they would disagree with you. They're not going to help me, the Democrats. Well, but they're not going to pave the country.
They're not going to ask you to leave the country.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, who knew? Well, kind of everybody.
Well, we told you, so
Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. More things are happening, as it turns out, and there's a long list of them.
Right, and I told David on the break, as long as I'm wearing my cranky pants, I have to tell the listeners, I don't like Ralph Nader to this day. That's just the way it is. I'm a very practical
Ralph
person.
Nader
if you're not
himself.
helping, sit down, shut up, and leave.
Oh, all right.
I've forgiven him for 2000, and I never will.
Yeah.
Never.
We're not getting that back. So
No, we're not getting it back. And that's, we're not getting 2024 back either. So Jim Garrity writes in the Washington Post, The Cost of Chaos, conservative. And it was interesting because this is a series of, how do you feel about these tariffs? And again, you can always find some, dumbass Republicans saying, well, it's good because it's disruptive, even though they've already been rescinded and they were all for show. Because, they always say that, because what else are they going to say? Right. Otherwise, they'd have to admit that their entire worldview is wrong, and they won't do that. But Garrity writes, The Cost of Chaos, picture being an automaker in Michigan and getting 30 to 40% of the parts used in your factory from Canada. You know how much all the parts cost now, but depending on what mood Trump is in and how he feels about Justin Trudeau and in the near future, the cost might be 25% higher next month. Flavia Volpe, president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association in Canada, says automotive parts can often cross the Detroit River, that is to say, Canada, U.S., Canada, 7 times before final assembly. Picture the tariff being added to the final cost each time the part moves from Canada to the U.S. and back. Or picture running a trucking company in Wisconsin. The refineries that serve Wisconsin rely primarily on Canadian crude oil, so enacting the tariff would increase the current gas price of $2.89 on average by 20 to 50 cents a gallon. The typical semi-truck holds 120 to 150 gallons of fuel. Some have 2 tanks, so filling up will cost anywhere from $24 to $150 more than now. Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, so he does have a position, tried to reassure the audience the market should be comforted by all this because taken as a whole, we're going to have lower inflation and faster growth, and we're going to have a more secure and prosperous America, which is good for the world. And you probably notice, Garrity writes, that the markets are not at all comforted by this.
I guess not. And why would they be? It's remarkable just to see people say the opposite of what's going on. You know, prices will go down. With a tariff? How?
Trump is so erratic, he writes, unpredictable and quick to change course, he might as well consult the magic 8-ball for economic forecasting. Businesses hate uncertainty.
Yes.
When they're not sure how much things are going to cost, they're less likely to spend money on new workers, new plants, research and development, advertising, or anything else. The U.S. is a strong economy and it can handle a lot of headwinds. It's just a shame that one of the biggest drivers of uncertainty is sitting in the Oval Office.
Yes.
So, there's that.
Yeah.
Leon Krause writes, reckless accusations deepen rifts. After throwing the bilateral relationship with Mexico into hours of unnecessary turmoil, Donald Trump abruptly declared 1-month pause. Right. Trump said he secured Mexico's commitment to deploy 10,000 of its National Guard troops to the U.S. border. They do that every year. Biden had it too. What will happen in a month's time is anyone's guess. For now, though, both governments appear to consider the matter closed. Regardless, this episode cannot be dismissed as merely a passing quarrel. In justifying its decision to impose tariffs, the government accused its Mexican counterpart of colluding with organized crime and seemed to allege that Claudia Sheinbaum, the president's administration, is protecting criminal organizations that traffic fentanyl. This accusation marks a formal rupture in more than 30 years of cooperation between U.S. and Mexican governments. How can one work with a government after accusing it of being allied with organized crime?
He's just saying words and doesn't even realize it.
Right, and Sheinbaum treated it that way. Sheinbaum's government responded to the accusation with composure, dismissing it as slander. In a morning news conference, Sheinbaum simply stated she has expressed her disagreement with the U.S. government's claim. Politically and diplomatically, it makes sense for Sheinbaum to brush it off, but the issue can't end there. The cartels certainly affect politics in Mexico, especially at the state level. Organized crime has impacted local elections, and Mexican public life is rife with suspicions of political figures colluding with criminal organizations, but the Trump administration's allegations go much further. Given that Trump has declared the cartels to be terrorist organizations by executive order, accusing the Mexican government of collusion with terrorist organizations could have serious legal ramifications. If he's evidence for his claims, he needs to present it.
Well, there isn't.
And then the conservatives, you can always find them. Well, Canada needs to wake up and pay attention to what's going on here. I read the article the other day from the Globe and Mail in that regard. The Canadians are going to have a low dollar, and they really need to wake up.
What does that even mean? I don't know.
Yeah, what does that even mean? So there's that. By the way, the write-up, Mercury News in California has the 2.2 billion gallon of water flowing out of 2 Central California reservoirs because of Trump's orders have been completely and totally wasted.
Oh, no.
I mean, because it was in the wrong season. It was let out in the wet season. You can't get the water back. It won't be there when you need it in the dry season. That's bad. It won't get to Southern California. And that's, a given because of the way the waterways work. It was risky because it could have flooded out a lot of farmers. Luckily, the people in charge of the dams and reservoirs didn't pay attention to what they were told to do and didn't let out all the water they were supposed to.
Yeah.
Because it was all for show, just like his Gaza proposal, just like, his tariff stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff is for show, and so fine. But losing 2 billion gallons of water
is that bad?
in a dry area is a bad thing, and a lot of bad things are going to happen, even though it's just for show. So that's a theme.
Yes.
And then Morning Digest covers this. Our friend Jeff Singer, used to be DKE, Daily Kos Elections. They now have their own place called the Down Ballot. Parties make deal to end walkout in Minnesota House. The Democrats had walked out because there's basically an even split in the House in Minnesota. The Republicans are up 1, but there's a special election that's going to happen. And when that happens, it'll be tied. And they couldn't agree on what to do, so the Democrats walked out and weren't letting any business get done. Tim Walz announced earlier today he'd set March 11th for the special election. The Republicans have a 67-66 edge, but that will end with that election because it's a reliably Democratic seat. So the agreement
you should elect
is
2 people.
That the Republicans get to be the speaker in the 67-67 House, but the committees will have co-chairs.
Okay.
And so they figured out a way to get along, which is okay.
Yeah. They have figured they've set that down. So was that the result of the walkout then?
Yep, that's the result of the walkout.
All right, I got it now. I thought they were walking out now.
No, they've been
walking
out.
back in. Okay.
They're walking in.
Got it. It's the end of the walkout. So we should call it a walk-in.
Yes.
Easy. I understand that.
Parties make deal to end walkout in Minnesota House.
All right, there we go. I got it now. I was like, I heard walkout Minnesota House. Deal made. Well, then
so
walk in.
Too long didn't read. Republicans get sole control of the speakership, which is still tied. Committees will soon have bipartisan chairs. So that's all good.
Right. Put tax on both of them.
Right.
The chairs, that is. Not a tax. Tax. Never mind.
Well, as Groucho used to say, I think we should take up the carpet. I say we take up the tax. Well, you got to take up the tax before you could take up the carpet. It's just the way it works.
Okay.
So you got to do things, in a proper manner.
Yeah, procedure.
Groucho had
is
an
important.
answer for everything. He was a genius.
Yes. You should have let him reprogram the Treasury payments.
Right.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Alex Samuels
more?
is writing
Can't believe it.
at Daily Kos. This is a front page story. Democratic voters aren't too happy with their party.
Oh.
And this is from polling data from Civics.
Yes.
I always like to follow Civics stuff, so this is the write-up. It's right now front page lead story.
Well,
the voters anyway are. After Democrat Kamala Harris lost last year's presidential election, party activists and strategists pointed fingers at who deserves the blame. Now that Trump has taken office, signed many unpopular executive orders, and picked a host of unqualified cabinet nominees, polling suggests the Democratic electorate is mad because their elected officials aren't doing enough to stop it. 60% of registered voters view the Democratic Party unfavorably, compared with 33% who view it favorably. The results aren't rosy with a closer look. 21% of Democrats have an unfavorable view of their own party. And 18 to 34-year-old Democrats, that rises to 30%. 35% of black voters have an unfavorable view, while the same is true for a staggering 63% of Hispanic voters, which makes sense. The reaction from Democratic leaders to Trump's return to power has been way more subdued than 2017. The resistance appears to be dead. Democratic lawmakers such as John Fetterman have downright surrendered. And so the most pressing issue is retaking the House in 2026. And if history is on their side, since the president's party usually has a bad midterm, that'd be true if Trump's planned policies backfire. But if they do, Democrats need to stoke the flames.
Oh, we have to stoke something. Hold on. All right.
So
they
took the first step. They elected Ken Martin, chair of the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, to be the new chair of the Democratic National Committee. Theoretically, Martin should ensure the national arm of the party has an organized opposition. In Congress, there are also small signs of life. Hakeem Jeffries sent a letter to his caucus outlining a 10-point plan for thwarting the agenda. I've made clear to House Republican leadership any effort to steal taxpayer money must be chucked off in the upcoming government funding bill, if not sooner. But the challenge is not just that their party has a reputation for fecklessness, but also the voters have a little faith in them. Well, basically, you have to deliver. Voters clearly want a reborn, revitalized Democratic Party. It's not that they're deserting the Democrats. They just need to light a fire under leadership.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Yes, and all the slowing down of major legislation, et cetera, there has to be major legislation first before you can slow it down. And they're only doing one bill, as it turns out. And they haven't got a chance to slow that down yet. But nominations, certainly, yes. It looks like they might get people in line on some, if not all, of the remaining nominations. I can't believe that it's become a difficult thing to get Democrats to just vote no. It's not going to change the outcome, but I guess if you're getting threats, that might explain it. But vote no. You know what? If you vote yes, you're still going to get threats. Don't worry about it.
So this is new polling data. Speaking of data, this is not from Civics. This is from data for Progress. 61% of voters oppose abolishing the Department of Education, including majorities of voters across age and educational status. I'll send that one to you. But the point is, what Trump is doing is, in fact, unpopular. And because it's unpopular, Democrats should use that to their advantage. It's okay to oppose him because he's suggesting doing unpopular things.
Yeah, and you know what? It's,
and
in America, it's okay
to
oppose him. Yeah. Why? It's okay to oppose him if you want to, just because, although it's becoming increasingly dangerous, I suppose, but that's what you're supposed to do.
Well, politicians, almost by definition, need this kind of information to have a backbone.
Yeah, that's true, and they need to know that people know it, and that's what's happening. I understand the volume of phone calls to Democratic offices. And by the way, you can expand that, particularly if you live in a place where maybe you have a Republican representative in the House of Representatives, but who maybe didn't win by all that gigantic a margin. There's a good, remember, this place is practically tied as it is, but there's a good 20 Republicans who, barely squeaked by, who if their phones light up, they're going to have to pay attention to. They may not, be able to find the fortitude to vote against Trump, but you can at least make them stay up at night worrying. So phone calls work. It's true. They don't always get you the result you want, but there's an impact, and they notice when their phones start lighting up. And like I said, it's difficult to tie a phone call that you make to an outcome, a result. But if you want to light a fire under people, that's one way to do it.
That's one way to do it. Call your regional office. It's
right.
Better than trying to call Washington.
Yeah, if you can't get through.
Go ahead and call them. And if you have a Democratic representative, tell them you want them to oppose. And if that means slowing the government down, do it.
Yeah.
Do whatever it is to inflict pain on the Republican side. They would do it to you in a heartbeat, and just do it to them because they have to understand this price. Meanwhile, Norm Eisen points out today is a deadline for federal workers to accept this fake resignation offer.
Yes. Right.
And so more to say about it tomorrow, I guess, on your show.
I guess. I don't know. We're going to find out what happens and whether or not a system-wide email goes out saying, you snooze, you lose, or what. There's also, by the way, no guarantee whatsoever that if you accept the offer, no guarantee that you'll get what was offered to you, and B, no guarantee given that federal IT systems are, let's say, in flux. There's going to be, I would imagine, just dealing with the volume that they've got of federal workers, that somewhere in the numbers of thousands of people who will have said that they accepted the offer will be listed as not having accepted the offer.
Right.
So
here's more of what Trump does is for show and doesn't have any meaning. Trump says he's signing an executive order to make new Attorney General Pam Bondi the head of a task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias.
Well, terrific.
What does that mean?
He's almost out of Sharpies. That's it. I don't know. Nothing. Anti-Christian bias. Huge amounts of anti-Christian bias out there. They keep saying that it's a Christian country, but for some reason we're biased against ourselves or something. I don't know. Well, who knows? She's the head of a thing. There you go. Like Marco Rubio, they're gonna see who's the head of more things at any given time. I assume what's going on here, my read on what's happening with all of these executive orders is that the staff have either decided among themselves that this is a good idea or have been instructed perhaps by Donald Trump. That's how he wants to spend his day. Signing things. He sits at his desk. He doesn't have to stand up. And a press that he figures is, if not adoring, at least willing to pay attention to him and just give him an audience to just spout. And I think that's his favorite activity. It's the new guerrilla channel, is executive orders.
Right.
You just sign things.
This one is from The Hill, again, sticking with a theme here about Musk being unpopular. And the headline is GOP support for Musk influence with Trump falls dramatically. The share of Republicans who say they want tech billionaire Elon Musk to have significant influence in the Trump administration has fallen substantially. Mm-hmm. In the Economist YouGov poll taken in the days after the November election, 47% of surveyed Republicans said they wanted Musk to have a lot of influence. 29% wanted a little, 12% wanted him to have none at all. Today, it's 26% wanted to have influence, and 43% say they want to have a little, and 17% say they want none at all. So as his popularity drops, he becomes the bigger target. And target not just in terms of political rhetoric, but lawsuits.
Yeah. Well, maybe I was just thinking maybe the thing to do here is Republican elected officials are, I think, exploitable in this in terms of finding a way to get them to oppose Elon Musk. And they're the ones that I imagine would have the influence necessary to actually do something about getting him out of there. But they need to be reminded that they profit from the donor class by being the middlemen in the policy setting regime. People who are outside of government but who want governmental results give money to Republican politicians and say, do this task, and then I'll continue to give you more money. When the ultra wealthy simply eliminate the middleman, and maybe this is the Silicon Valley genius, right? Why pay a middleman when we can make an app that will be your middleman and you can buy things directly or whatever? So you can just buy the government directly now if you have enough money. There's no skim for the Republicans out there. And he's just doing the job directly himself. I wonder whether he's going to say, it's interesting, the whole thing is a threat of he'll fund primaries against Republicans who in Congress who don't vote his and Trump's way, allegedly. But I suspect that he may say, I don't actually need to run people. One, Congress is worthless. Two, I'm getting the results I want. So therefore, three, I don't need to pay any money or donate any money. The reservoir of funds for you guys dries up. And the only
that
way
runs a risk of
Yeah.
having them vote against him when legislation comes up.
That's possible, if there is such a thing, of course. Now,
if there is such a thing, it was too early to say.
If he can, we'll have to see how this shakes out. Like, I imagine if they passed legislation, what happens if they pass legislation getting in his way and suddenly the federal computers that record this stuff say, no, there wasn't any legislation like that. What are you talking about?
Aaron Dubey, speaking of Silicon Valley, Provost Professor of Economics, UMass Amherst, inequality, labor market policies, and competition is that's his jam.
Okay.
He writes, just as stability can be sometimes overrated in political and economic context, so can disruption. Today, a large swath of our business and political leaders fetishize disruption, with that nowhere more pronounced than Silicon Valley.
Right.
So the current political moment may indeed be a corrective against disruption, and highlighting how disruption can be extremely foolish.
Oh, okay.
So let's hope so.
Yeah, and it should be taken as a larger message.
See Gaza proposal.
Okay. You could take the larger message of, disruption is really actually bad, but disruption is the mantra of business these days, the most lucrative businesses of Silicon Valley. Yeah. So then, should you run government like a business? That's what I'd like you to think about. No. Okay. Move fast and break things. That's for people who, don't run governments.
Right.
All right. And also, I guess that's another thing of eliminating the middleman, right? Modern business is so nimble. You have to move at the speed of business. Government should move at the speed of business. And then if it does and actually is moved by business people horning their way in on these things, you're, again, eliminating the middleman. And, maybe we don't. What if government really did move at the speed of business and used its leverage to, do these things and take over and decide who owns what and who's getting paid for what, then maybe you don't need business in the end. Government can just do it all. And one guy can own both.
And for me, a final observation, this from Jonathan Robinson. Operatives wish they were pundits. Comms people wish they were journalists. Pundits wish they were operatives. And journalists wish they were comms people. And none of them really do a really good job.
The grass is always greener, I guess.
Grass is always greener.
Well, it's not. And there's no water to make it green this summer. So the grass will never be green again.
Yeah, well, this is, again, one of the worst election results. But, of course, it's also one of the worst times to try to evaluate what's going on. Because, again, the first month or two after a new president comes in, they tend to be at the height of their power, and then things go sour after that. In Trump's case, they're going sour a little sooner. In Elon Musk and President Musk's case, going sour even sooner than that. So take heart, keep doing what you're doing, do more, and let time and natural thermostatic response, which is to say if Republicans are in power, people tend to favor Democrats. Let those tools work. Take care.
Okay.
And I'll talk to you on Monday.
All right. We'll do that unless that legislatively becomes another day.
Yeah.
We'll have to see if they just declare it something that's going to be
that's what
Day.
Musk is going to do. In order to efficiently save money, he's eliminating Mondays. Everybody hates Mondays.
That's right. It would be a very popular move.
From now on, it's Tuesday.
There we'd have it. All right. If you're going to do that with daylight savings time, we'll call it weekday savings time.
Exactly.
Get rid of Monday. All right. Well, then you'll have to come in on Tuesday.
Monday is going to be moved to Gaza.
And we're going to own it.
It will be set up to be always Monday there. And
Dreary.
We'll just move it out of the country. We'll outsource anything we don't like.
I guess. Wow. Okay.
Of course, if Monday is in Gaza, there's no room for the Palestinians. So we'll just have to move them somewhere else. It's just, sorry.
Yeah. Well, they can live in perpetual Tuesday in Jordan.
Yeah, something like that.
I don't know.
Anyway, take care.
Sure.
Talk to you next
Thank
week.
you. All right. And we'll move on to what? I don't know. More
Wednesday.
planned disruption. Oh, yeah. There was a joke somewhere along the line. I can't remember who made it about scientists discovering a new day in between. I think it's George Carlin. Discovering a new day in between. I don't know. I don't remember how the rest of the joke went. So it's not very funny if you can't remember it or tell it right. But we'll work it out.
And
we'll
they decided to call this new day Pluto.
Why not?
Why not?
Could be
anything.
anything.
They can get rid of it by fiat.
Okay.
Anyway, take care.
Got it. Thank you. You too. And let's see. So what to chime in on next? Oh, I don't know. There's no way to catch up. We're just going to select some items at random, I guess, because I've been thinking about them. This morning, ProPublica has, I guess, been spending some time wondering what we've been wondering here, or what I've been wondering anyway. No one else appears to want to wonder about it with me, about what can be rewritten, erased, eliminated, and whether eliminating things from the record, memory holing things, for instance, is enough to actually convince people that the truth is different than we experienced it in objective reality. And here's an experiment in it, and an experiment in covering it at ProPublica. Alec McGillis writes for them under the headline, Memory Holing January 6th. We've definitely been seeing that happening. What happens when you try to make history vanish and not just redefine history or tell people it was just tourism or it was a day of love or that Antifa did it or the FBI did it or that nothing happened or that it was patriotic or who knows what. Here, in not only in pardoning all the January 6th defendants, but in taking over at the Department of Justice, beginning to delete the files that documented everything that we actually found out about January 6th during the investigation. What's the practical fallout of something like that? The Trump administration's decision to delete a DOJ database of cases against Capitol riot defendants places those who seek to preserve the historical record in direct opposition to their own government. I guess you want to document along the way another instance of complete and utter hypocrisy. Not that that does anything and doesn't bother MAGA people to be labeled that way, but you don't have to think that far back to remember that their economic anxiety is what drove them to oppose the movement to, say, remove Confederate memorial statues from the public square, because of course those guys were traitors and they fought against the United States of America, and there ought not to be statues to them. And the answer was always, but my heritage. That you're attacking history. You're trying to erase history. Well, the minute you gain control, you will attempt to erase history too. Oh, no, I won't. That'll make me a hypocrite. Oh, look. But you could eliminate things that will make your life easier, because people won't have as easy of a time finding out that you are a violent felon. Oh, well, that history I'm in favor of erasing, but just not the other kind, because economic anxiety. Anyway, the piece begins this way. On January 10th, that's this year, the U.S. Department of Justice released a 123-page report on the 1921 racial massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which claimed several hundred lives and left the thriving black neighborhood of Greenwood in smoldering ruins. This is, I guess, setting the stage for another erasure of history. The department's investigation determined that the attack was, quote, so systematic and coordinated that it transcended mere mob violence. What might fit that description in the modern era? One wonders. While it conceded, the report that is, that no avenue of prosecution now exists for these crimes, unquote, the department hailed the findings as the federal government's first thorough reckoning with this devastating event, which officially acknowledges, illuminates, and preserves for history the horrible ordeals of the massacre's victims. So you can see what's coming next, how important it is to establish the historical record and acknowledge it, and how vicious to undo it. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue reading through this piece from ProPublica about what it means to gain control of federal data systems and use it to erase inconvenient parts of history. And we had just learned that on January 10th, the Department of Justice had released a 123-page report on the 1921 racial massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And while acknowledging that there is no avenue of prosecution for these crimes left to us, it is nonetheless important to acknowledge and to reckon with this devastating event while acknowledging, illuminating, and preserving the history of the ordeals of the massacre's victims. Until this day, the Justice Department has not spoken publicly about the race massacre or officially accounted for the horrific events that transpired in Tulsa, said Kristen Clark, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, in announcing the report. This report breaks the silence through a rigorous examination and a full accounting of one of the darkest episodes of our nation's past, so dark that most people actually hadn't heard of it in modern times. Really, actually, I more than any other event, I think, bringing it to people's attention was, I think, the HBO series The Watchmen, which I mentioned in negative light the other day. But it was interesting in that it actually was, if not an introduction, well, actually for most people it probably was an introduction to it, and people were astonished to look it up and find that there was a basis. What? There was a basis in truth for that? Oh, I can't believe it. For me, it was more along the lines of, oh, yes, that's right. Because it's a thing that you can forget about. You can learn about and forget about in this country because it's just not it's not taught as a formative an important event in American history, and in many cases it's not taught at all. I mean, I don't believe I was taught that in, high school history or anything, but high school history is a spotty thing. You're lucky if you get to World War II before the year is over. It's just difficult to cover all the material. And they kind of teach the world wars as a unit. Well, there was a World War I and a World War II. In between, there was a Great Depression. Write that down, Great Depression. And that's all we have time for because it's June. We got to get out of here. But, I also suspect. I don't even know if there was an entry for it in my high school history book, which is, that's the thing. It was a giant massacre. We don't know what to say about it. We don't know. We got no words for it. And so we just don't. So this was important, of course, for the Department of Justice to do. This report breaks the silence and reflects our commitment to the pursuit of justice and truth, even in the face of insurmountable obstacles. But only 2 weeks later, the department took a strikingly different action regarding the historical record of a violent riot. It removed from its website the searchable database of all cases stemming from the January 6th, 2021 assault on the Capitol that were prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Imagine, whatever your poor excuse is for not noting the Tulsa race massacre in a history book, if that's the case, who knows? I don't remember what history book we used. I can't prove that it wasn't in there. I can only prove that I don't remember discussing it. Well, I can't even prove that. I can tell you I don't remember discussing it in American history classes in high school. But, I guess you could dismiss it by saying, well, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, look, how many other events from around the country that happened in places that you might consider off the East Coast beaten path, I suppose, if you're East Coast centric, that we note in the historical teachings, the canonical historical teachings in high school, nonetheless. But you would think you would not skip anything happening to the capital of the United States. And yet here we are. These jarringly discordant actions were, of course, separated by a transfer of power, the inauguration of President Donald Trump, who swiftly moved to issue pardons, commute prison sentences, and request case dismissals for all of the 1,500-plus people charged with crimes on January 6th, including seditious conspiracy and assaulting police officers. So once again, pardoning all those assaults, by the way, I would now tell you, can't count as a peaceful transfer of power. It was a transfer of power, but not a peaceful one. Was there violence that day? No. But was there violence forgiven and violent criminals released onto the streets? Yes, you bet. Have several of them been rearrested? Yes. Have a couple of them died since? Yes. Were they killed in confrontations with police? Yes. So, peaceful transition of power didn't happen this year. Anyway, that sweeping clemency order, F it, as he said the full verbiage of it. F it, release them all, Trump said, according to Axios, prompted a wave of outrage and criticism even from some Republicans. I've always said that when you pardon people who attack police officers, you're sending the wrong signal to the public at large, said South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. Not that he cares. The removal of the database happened more quietly, but it is worthy of notice in its own right. It signals the Trump administration's intention to not only spare the president's supporters any further consequences for their role in the riot, but to erase the event from the public record, to cast it into the fog of confusion and forgetting in which the Greenwood massacre had existed for so long. As some have noted, this push to whitewash recent history carries a disconcerting echo of countless autocratic regimes, from the Chinese Communist Party's memory holding of the Tiananmen Square massacre to the Argentine military junta's disappearing of dissidents in the 1970s. It comes at the same time the administration is also seeking to whitewash the teaching of American history more generally. Trump issued an executive order, supposedly, on January 29th, entitled Ending Racial Indoctrination in K-12 Schooling, that threatens to withhold federal funds from schools that teach that the country is fundamentally racist, sexist, or otherwise discriminatory, and instructs the government to prioritize federal resources consistent with applicable law to promote patriotic education. One wonders, would teaching the Tulsa massacre be allowed? And most people, out of an abundance of caution, would probably say, no, it's not, even though you can certainly comply with it. I'm not teaching that the country's fundamentally racist, sexist, or otherwise discriminatory, but I am teaching that those things have happened. Naughty, naughty people. Not the country, you could say. I mean, it's not a good teaching, because you'd probably be better off sticking to the curriculum and says, well, maybe we are fundamentally, in fact, racist, sexist, and otherwise discriminatory, but I'm not allowed to say, my interpretation of it is, I'm not allowed to say fundamentally. Everyone else's interpretation of it is, you're not allowed to say discriminatory, racist, or sexist. Well, why? Why do you read it that way? And the answer is because that's the way they're going to interpret it, and they're going to come down. And you see the fact that they're covering up displays of people of color or women at the NSA, which, by the way, apparently those coverings have come down after some additional protest. But that's only being replaced with reports around the country of things at the National Science Foundation, grants and grant applications at several departments that now have a list of words like that's as fascist and as censorious as it could possibly be. A list of words that if they appear in your grant application will disqualify your grant. And I mean, it's one thing to say, well, we're going to get rid of DEI, whatever that is. And then it's another yet still to say, well, if you mention the term DEI, we're going to kick your grant out. What if you say, DEI is terrible and I love Trump? I guess the algorithm kicks you out, and then you can protest. But then it's also like, well, if you say, well, we surveyed 150,000 women about their views on access to women's health care. Nope. That's DEI. We're getting rid of that. And you're not allowed to talk about it. No, that's not even. We acknowledge that there are women. Yes, even the Trump administration says there are such things as women, right? And that's it was one of only two choices that they would officially have us acknowledge. How are we writing half of them off? This makes no sense. More than half of them. It's not even a recognition of a minority. It's the majority. Anyway, would the teaching of the Tulsa massacre be allowed? That is one question. But the removal of the database, the January 6th one, is troubling for another reason, too. It undermines our ability to consider the events of January 6th in all their complexity and particularity. I was made aware of that complexity when I spent several days after the riot immersing myself in more than 500 smartphone videos that participants had shared on the Parler social media app for an essay accompanying ProPublica's compilation of the video trove. What struck me perhaps more than anything else about the videos was the sheer diversity, that's funny, of the motivations, profiles, and actions that they put on display. Yes, seen from afar, the mob seemed to assume the unity of purpose in a single organized mass bent on destruction. But seen in the close-up of the videos, heterogeneity emerged. I don't know if that's really super important. Let's see what the argument is here. There were young men with puffy jackets and pom-pom hats. I'm sorry, young women. But maybe they were trans. Who knows? There were young women with puffy jackets and pom-pom hats, probably some men too. Middle-aged women who could have been coming straight from a business lunch. Young men furtively removing their black tactical gear under the cover of a tree to pull on red MAGA sweatshirts to pass as mere Trump supporters. There were people viciously attacking police officers and denigrating them. You should be ashamed, effing pansies, things like that. Others pleading with them not to. Please don't do that. Do not throw, stuff, or maybe they mean the actual item, the actual feces, at the police. Do not hurt the cops. But still others thanking the cops who were arriving on the scene. Back the blue, we love you. They couldn't figure out what part of their agenda they were promoting. There were people smashing in windows and others decrying them for doing so. Oh, God, no, stop. What the F is wrong with him? He's Antifa. Right. There were people who, in a matter of moments, swung from being pitchfork-carrying marauders to wide-eyed tourists as they deferentially asked a Capitol Police officer for directions, or swung their cameras up to capture the inside of the dome. This is the state capitol, which is wrong. An awestruck man said to his young female companion, "This was the great unnecessary," it said necessary. I said unnecessary. Why? "This was a great necessary undertaking for the 4-year effort by the Department of Justice to draw distinctions for the sake of allocating individual accountability." Considering things on a case-by-case basis, which Trump would not, of course. They had been considered on a case-by-case basis. The people who were in jail, who were released, were there because their cases were the worst. The people who had been prosecuted and sentenced were there because their actions were the worst. The ones who got long sentences got it because their activities were the worst. People that got light sentences because, after all, they turned out to be one of these people that you're talking about here in this article, that they reconsidered their violent actions or abstained from them and yet went inside the Capitol where they were not authorized to be. Minor crime. Okay, so this was the great necessary undertaking of the 4-year effort by the DOJ to draw distinctions for the sake of allocating individual accountability. By poring over countless such videos and other evidence, investigators zeroed in on hundreds of people who could be identified as engaging in and instigating the most violence. There was Daniel Rodriguez, who could be seen on camera driving a stun gun into the neck of Officer Michael Fanone. He was sentenced to more than 12 years. There was Thomas Webster, a former New York City police officer and member of the Marine Corps who swung a metal flagpole at an officer. He got 10 years. There was Peter Schwartz, a Pennsylvania welder who attacked the police with a chair and chemical spray. He got 14 years. Inevitably, some of the outcomes were ripe for second guessing. Kirsten Kohlenberg, the former U.S. correspondent for Germany's Die Zeit newspaper, reported recently on the case of Stephen Randolph, a 34-year-old Kentucky man who received an 8-year sentence for his role in pushing over one of the metal security barriers on the Capitol grounds, injuring a police officer in the process. Others in the same group received much milder sentences. Trump and his allies could have chosen to comb through cases and pardon only the defendants who they could argue had been painted with too broad a brush. But that's not what Trump did. Instead, he himself took up the broadest brush possible and wiped it all clear. In doing so, he let defendants off the hook. But in another sense, with the mass pardon and deletion of the database, he deprived all of the January 6th participants of individual agency, of individuality, period. In a sense, he rendered them just what the most ardent castigation on the other side had cast them as from the outset, a mindless mob. That's an interesting interpretation. I don't think they're going to follow it, but okay, we can. As chance has it, at the end of Trump's first week in office, I was in Tulsa. I went to the Greenwood Rising Museum, which tells the story of the rise of the neighborhood and its sudden destruction. It is a powerful presentation despite the dearth of documentation of the violence. Snatches of oral history from survivors play over a video simulation of gunfire and arson. Before and after photos capture the near total obliteration of the neighborhood's prospering commercial core by first the attack and later urban renewal. One of the museum's central preoccupations is the attempt by Tulsa authorities in leading white denizens to downplay the massacre by framing it as a Negro uprising. Only a couple decades afterwards, the museum notes, many in Tulsa were barely aware it had happened at all. This cover-up came with lasting consequences for Greenwood survivors who were denied insurance claims for their destroyed homes, not to mention any form of civic restitution. Even now, many black residents of Tulsa are left wondering why the reckoning represented by the Department of Justice investigation is not joined by substantive reparations of any sort. The last two living survivors of the massacre, Leslie Benningfield Randall and Viola Fletcher, said in a statement responding to the report, "The DOJ confirms the government's role in the slaughter of our Greenwood neighbors, but refuses to hold the institutions accountable under federal law. Still," they said, "we are relieved to see one of the biggest cover-ups of American history come crashing down." And now, back in Washington, the federal government has embarked on an entirely new cover-up of another day's enormous violence. The erasure will not be nearly as successful this time around. There are, after all those videos, which live on ProPublica's website, among other places, while much of the deleted database can be found on the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. And ProPublica is one of 10 media organizations that have jointly sued the federal government, seeking to obtain 14,000 hours of January 6th surveillance footage. But for the time being, at least, those seeking to preserve the record of one of the darkest days in recent U.S. history will be doing so, like the survivors of Greenwood and other outbursts of violence around the world, in direct opposition to their own government. It's very interesting perspective on it, and an interesting turnabout, in terms of understanding what the erasure of the criminal records, the pardons, does. An interesting version of events that says, those of you who claimed that you really were, in fact, just there to protect the country and you never engaged in any violence, now you have one of those tainted pardons on your record. People will think you were guilty of some sort of outrageous anti-government violence that day. But I don't think that's going to move you to action in any way. But yeah, more to the point, I was kind of hoping for more about the dangers of what it means to be able to just alter the historical record that way. And that, I guess, will still be left to our imagination. We just have to start wondering about what will Elon's lost boys get access to. Not once they're done ravaging the various executive departments. Is there any reason to think that would Mike Johnson, would John Thune, would either of them deny Elon Musk particularly if he demanded it publicly and made it a litmus test on support for Trump? Would they deny him access to the legislative branch's information technology? And what could they do with it? And I suppose if you successfully erased bits and pieces of history, you could start experimenting with erasing bits and pieces in other places too. That vote didn't go well. Somebody's embarrassed about how they voted after the fact, and they were proved to be a complete idiot. Do you change the congressional record? Can you ask Marco Rubio as acting director, acting archivist of the United States to just go along with the erasure of records? Like I said, it would be very difficult to, for instance, erase people's memories of a federal judge who's been serving on the bench for 10 years or who's on the Supreme Court, and everybody witnessed them taking the bench very publicly. But maybe the last couple of judges, let's say, who were approved under the Biden, or from the Biden administration and approved by the then Democratic Senate, who are new to the bench, like, can you dive into the congressional record and delete from the Senate records the debate and vote on that confirmation? Can you go back into the archives and erase the nomination and the commission once they were affirmed and approved by the Senate? I mean, I guess you could try, and I don't know who argues with you about it. I don't know that people have the time to argue about it now that the zone is so flooded. All right. Speaking of floods, I guess we never did finish that technical explanation, but I don't think I'm going to go back to that today. The technical explanation of what happened to all that water being released from the dammed lakes. Not those damned lakes in California, but as Greg mentioned, essentially dooming the California farmers during the dry season upcoming, which I guess, I don't know whether Trump gave any thought to that. I mean, I guess I doubt it, but I don't know that he's very worried about it. Oh, a food shortage in I'll just say it's Antifa, I guess, or let them eat Twinkies or something. I don't know how he'll deal with it. The farmers who lose money on their now dead crops will, I guess, if they're Trump supporters, just get direct payments from the Treasury and be made whole, and I guess be bribed into shutting up about that. And Others will just have to go under. And besides which, it's fitting that the crops should wither and die before harvest, because we'll have deported all the people who were going to harvest it anyway. So, and I imagine they just pull out the old playbook. I don't know. For some reason, this is now a year into the Trump presidency, or 6 months into the Trump presidency. There's no food on the table. It's Joe Biden's fault, and Antifa. They totally did it. Meanwhile, people won't be eating in some of the most damaged war zones and poverty-stricken zones around the country because, of course, USAID has been destroyed. I thought it might be of some interest to at least grab and pass on the framing that Nicholas Kristof is taking here in his opinion piece at the New York Times. The headline kind of says it all. The world's richest men take on the world's poorest children. That is yet another way of looking at the USAID massacre. The world's richest man is boasting about destroying the United States Agency for International Development, which saves the lives of the world's poorest children, saying he shoved it, quote, into the wood chipper. He's very gleeful about this, of course. By my calculations, Elon Musk probably has a net worth greater than that of the poorest billion people on Earth. Just all put together, that is what he's saying here. Just since Donald Trump's election, Musk's personal net worth has grown by far more than the entire annual budget of USAID, which in any case accounts for less than 1% of the federal budget. It's callous for gleeful billionaires like Musk and President Trump to cut children off from medicine. But as President John F. Kennedy pointed out when he proposed the creation of the agency in 1961, it's also myopic. Cutting aid, Kennedy noted, would be disastrous and in the long run more expensive. He added, our own security would be endangered and our prosperity imperiled. Perhaps that's why Russia has praised Trump's move. In contrast with Kennedy, the Trump administration braids together cruelty, ignorance, and short-sightedness, and that combination seems particularly evident in its assault on American humanitarian assistance. One person has already died of bird flu in the United States, and there is growing concerns of a pandemic, and yet Trump's suspension of foreign aid has interrupted bird flu surveillance in 49 countries, including, according to the Global Health Council, a U.S.-based nonprofit. Remember the American panic over the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014? Trump, of course, was particularly hysterical back then. In the end, the Ebola pandemic was averted in part because of USAID's work in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. As it happens, another Ebola outbreak has just been reported in Uganda, with 234 contacts identified so far. USAID would normally help suppress that, but now Trump and Musk have put it out of commission. Another hemorrhagic fever called Marburg virus broke out in Tanzania last month. There's the mention. Ding, 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 ding. It wasn't an invasion mention. It really should just be any mention of the country. That would be fun. Well, that's far more exciting, and it's a lot less messy than invading it. But Tanzania, I knew it. Anyway, Marburg virus broke out in Tanzania last month. Aid workers are rushing to contain the virus, but again, Trump has made the United States AWOL, leaving the world a little more vulnerable. A disclosure Kristof is making here. In 2012, USAID made some games for India and Africa based on a book my wife and I wrote entitled Half the Sky. USAID did not pay us anything for this, and the games did a good job promoting deworming, girls' education, and safe pregnancy. I've seen USAID operate all over the world, and it's a mixed picture. It's fair to complain that USAID is endlessly bureaucratic and that too much of the aid goes to so-called Beltway bandit American contractors rather than to needy people abroad. Yet, there's no basis for the White House mythology that USAID is an enclave of woke waste, reflected in Trump's claim that it spent about, quote, $100 million on condoms to Hamas. He doubled his previous claim of $50 million, he notes in this piece. That's nice. Male condoms cost the U.S. government 3.3 cents each. I actually heard less. But so that would be 3 billion condoms. By my calculation, for Hamas to use that many condoms in a year, each fighter would have to have sex 325 times a day every day. Well, the numbers help. That might wipe out Hamas as a fighting force more effectively than an Israeli bombardment. In any case, the actual amount of U.S. assistance spent on condoms for Gaza in recent years appears not to have been $100 million, but $0. Trump's policies are as reckless as his rhetoric. I'd welcome some restructuring of USAID, but this isn't restructuring. It's demolition, a blow to our values and interests alike. Musk lambasted USAID as a criminal organization, of all things to say about it. In fact, many of its employees have risked their lives in the best tradition of public service. The USAID Memorial Wall honors 99 people killed while working for the agency in places such as Sudan, Haiti, Afghanistan, and Ethiopia. I've seen genuine improvements in USAID over the years. Its public-private partnership to tackle lead poisoning, announced last year, was a model of American leadership. And so, from my travels, this is what USAID has come to mean to me. I've seen women and girls with obstetric fistula, a horrific childbirth injury, get $600 surgery that gives them back their lives. This is what USAID supports. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, in the interest of moving on, we abandoned the reading of the Nicholas Kristof piece in which he gives example after example after example. Good examples all of what USAID actually does that will embarrass zero Elon Musk acolytes and will do, well, it'll educate us about what we've lost. But it's not going to change Elon Musk's mind. He has no empathy for things like this. And there is more speculation to share about why he is so interested in doing away with USAID. There's another piece of the puzzle that Mighty OCD sent to me. And by the way, while I'm on it, I might as well point out, Mighty OCD now gets his own announcement of his joining us as a Patreon sponsor. I didn't even realize that wasn't the case up until now. And so, fantastic, wonderful. I totally appreciate it. You know, we call your name enough, right? Why not? I guess is probably what you figured. You also are joined by RJS, only identified as RJS. We'll use that. That's what the message said from Patreon, who already a member, nonetheless said, yes, you're right. I think I will, in fact, boost my contribution. So in the last 2 days or so, RJS and Mighty OCD joining the ranks, and that's always good news. I appreciate it. Again, thank you very much. I can't say it enough. And most days I can't even say it at all because there's just too much news going on. But wonderful to have you on board, and I very much appreciate the boost. I was talking about that the other day. As I try and allocate my own funds. Who should I be subscribing to? Who do I need to support? And how much does it cost? And, you know, sometimes when you're hit with the full cost per year up front and you think that's so much, you divide it by the number of times you're going to lean on those people and try and decide whether or not that's worth it. It's one thing to say, all right, well, I'll pay $75 a year for a subscription to someone's newsletter and then say, well, but how often do I really get a chance to read that newsletter? It's very valuable when I read it, but couldn't I get by with 10 articles a month or something like that from them? Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But if you're leaning on us every morning to share the news with you and you're willing to do so for the price of a soda from the vending machine each time, you know, or God help you if it's a cup of coffee each time, right? You know, $5, $6 a program. Well, I'm not asking. Well, why not? I guess I am asking. Everybody should go and do that. Send $5 a day. Holy mackerel. Well, then we'd be rolling and we could hire some people and make a more professional production for you, or save face at home anyway, and say, yes, we contribute to those kitchen table issues. We can afford some eggs now. thanks to my work. But I definitely appreciate it, and people reevaluating what it means to have this as a source, if not of news, then at least of discussion and sanity, and just finding out that there really are other people out there that think the same way, even if you can't find them anymore because the algorithm of your favorite social media has been changed. You get what I'm after here. Okay. So, Mighty OCD sent me this. I gave it to Scott yesterday for the roundup. We didn't get a chance to read it. Another theory of why, I'm sure there's something in all of them, and I'm sure it's a cumulative thing, why USAID got targeted. This one, Elon Musk's enemy, USAID, was investigating Starlink's contracts in Ukraine. From Gizmodo.com, Lucas Ropek wrote this piece, just published yesterday. In fact, the agency was in the midst of a probe into the billionaire's equipment at the time of Musk's assault. In other words, a gigantic conflict of interest that probably belongs on the record here. Since coming into power, Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, which isn't a department, I would say, has barraged USAID, the international aid agency that dispenses food and supplies to nations all over the world. It is likely that the agency will soon be shuttered and could be subsumed into the U.S. State Department. Now, new reporting shows USAID was actually investigating equipment from one of Musk's companies at the time that he attacked the agency. The Lever reported on Tuesday, levernews.com, reported on Tuesday that USAID's Inspector General, remember those guys? They used to have Inspectors General. I'm just sort of taking a look here at the Lever's publication here. That piece was entitled From Watergate to Elongate. I guess Elongate is really how you might pronounce that without the dash. Elongate. Anyway, the Lever reported on Tuesday, USAID's Inspector General was in the process of investigating its own public-private partnership between Musk's Starlink and the Ukrainian government at the time that the billionaire's Doge, or Dodgy, if you prefer, crippled the agency. Publicly available information about that probe is still online. An announcement from last May reads, quote, the USAID Office of the Inspector General, Inspections and Evaluations Division, is initiating an inspection of USAID's oversight of Starlink satellite terminals provided to the government of Ukraine. Our objectives are to determine, 1, how the government of Ukraine used the USAID provided Starlink terminals, and 2, how USAID monitored the government of Ukraine's use of USAID provided Starlink terminals. What did I just read? That was very, verbose. But how the government of Ukraine used the Starlink terminals, and how USAID monitored the government of Ukraine's use. Okay, fine. That's a little more than I need to know. Musk has called the agency evil and a criminal organization, though the fact that USAID was investigating the Starlink activities may suggest ulterior motivations for the billionaire's vitriol. It's unclear what the Starlink probe's status is right now. Musk's criminal remarks are funny, since it increasingly looks like Musk's dodgy, D-O-G-E, dodgy activities represent breaches of federal law and therefore may be construed as rampant criminal behavior. On Tuesday, the Washington Post noted that officials at half a dozen federal agencies had raised concerns over whether what Musk was doing was illegal. Those agencies included the Treasury Department, Education Department, USAID, of course, the General Services Administration, the Office of Personnel Management, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the White House Budget Office, among others, the newspaper reported. Dodgy also suffered its second lawsuit this week when union groups that protect federal workers sued the organization over its hijacking of the Treasury computer systems. The litigation alleges that Dodgy may be violating a federal privacy law by allowing Musk's stooges to access certain systems. Dodgy has been staffed by a bunch of kids in their 20s, as you know, who are now engaged in unprecedented, legally risky work. As far as I can tell, it's basically Elon being followed around by a bunch of Gregs, whatever that means. It's linked here if you want to take a look at that. If the bottom ever falls out of this thing and Dodgy runs into legal trouble, it's easy to imagine that Musk's army of anti-bureaucracy grunts might be considered expendable. USAID, of course, has a long controversial history and has often been accused by foreign governments of being a front for the CIA. While the agency dispenses aid to foreign countries, it has often been entangled in scandals. It hardly represents, as Sean Hannity puts it, radical DEI, woke transgender, leftist Green New Deal madness. Given its history, it's obvious that Musk's battle against the agency will play well with voters who earnestly believe Trump wants to destroy the deep state. That said, Elon Musk literally works for the deep state, so I don't know how his being in charge of this is any better. Okay. Oh, well, you're going to really destroy him with the hypocrisy. I'm sure he's going to be real sad. But an interesting point. And Musk's use of Starlink in Ukraine was always suspicious to begin with. And then, of course, he began limiting their ability to use the thing to launch attacks against Russia, which was highly suspicious in its own right. And by the way, what was it? I was reminded of something as we were reading through this. And I should have made a note somehow to myself at the time that led me to think about something else that the Musk group was up to. And now I can't remember what it was. But perhaps one of these other stories will remind me and we'll blurt it out at that point. Yeah. All right. Well, I have two other pieces from Tech Dirt, which we checked in with via Greg over the last couple of days. And, one of them, I guess, he made mention of. The first one I put away was a 25-year-old is writing backdoors into the Treasury's $6 trillion payment system. And who knows where that one leads, but at least it's noted and on the record. Although this is a very long one here. I might have to just read this one tomorrow. The 24-hour reality check, it's now 48 hours and probably, who knows, 72 hours into this. Musk's impossible power grab and America's crisis. That one over at Tech Dirt by Mike Brock, who I guess was I guess he's just tracking what's been going on and trying to document the atrocities as best as he can. But we'll never go through that one because that one looks like a tremendous read. Might try to do that one tomorrow. Let's see what else I can sneak in by way of, in the last, whatever we got here, 20 minutes. I'm just trying to scroll back through the Blue Sky feed to see what else has happened here. Oh, yeah, this was an interesting story. I mean, I don't know. Again, we'll just give you the gist of the story and just say, chalk it up to, oh, well, Trump's America, ladies and gentlemen. Egg shortage has gotten so bad, we're now reading headlines in the Washington Post about capers, heists, in which people are stealing eggs. This authorities scramble, to crack case, of 100,000 egg heist in Pennsylvania. About $40,000 worth of eggs were taken from a trailer belonging to Pete and Jerry's Organics, police said. U.S. wholesale egg prices are at a record high. So in Trump's America, we're black marketing eggs out there now. Not too Soviet, is it? Well, anyway, a daring heist in Pennsylvania. I don't know how daring it was. Chickens, not really known for their defensive capabilities, has left authorities shell-shocked. They're obviously making light of this. 100,000 organic eggs were stolen from a facility in Greencastle, just north of the Maryland border. The egg heist, worth approximately $40,000, comes at a time of record-high wholesale egg prices in the country and reports of shortages. Thieves stole the eggs from a distribution trailer belonging to Pete and Jerry's Organics on Saturday at around 8:40 p.m., according to a police report. Matter is under investigation, et cetera, et cetera. A theft of this magnitude involving food is extremely rare, the spokesperson for the police department said. All right. So, I mean, I don't know how much more information you need about that. Just the fact that it exists is enough. And by the way, it has reminded me of one of the things I remembered about the USAID attacks and the accusations being made against it. And I guess just as we heard the other day that they must have done some database searching to try to look for things that they could highlight as outrageous spending, and they searched Gaza and they came up with this budget for the anti-HIV initiative in Gaza province, Mozambique, and said anti-HIV, that means condoms for Gaza, that means Hamas, $100 million in condoms for Hamas we're now land on. It's like, what's interesting is watching Donald Trump play telephone with himself in his own head and come out with these ridiculous conclusions, and then literally doubling down on it. We actually just double the number and say, what the hell? Let's just claim that it's twice what I myself said yesterday. And he's able to do it, and is able to watch the major newspapers of the country just sort of write it down and say, well, there you go. Even though some people will note, yeah, yesterday he said it was 50, but no one will. The headline is never Trump crazy, should be committed immediately. That might change the path for this guy. He might say that, well, now he'll say that's terrible, arrest that guy. But earlier it might have done something. Anyway, the other nut-picked thing that they came up with was, I think if I picked up on the story correctly in passing, and I just haven't really read all the way through it yet, but the reports are that somebody discovered that, I guess someone in the executive offices maybe at USAID, that USAID pays for subscriptions to newspapers that it subscribes to so that its leadership can be up to date on, what the hell's going on in the world. And like I have said, I don't have the budget available to me that USAID does, but they've got it. And I guess if I had it, I too would be saying, let's subscribe to all of these subscription papers that we need to stay informed with. And one of them, I don't know if I agree with their choice on a personal level, but I think it's certainly defensible to say, well, as it turns out, they needed subscriptions to Politico, but not just Politico Pro. Well, I don't know if anybody really needs a subscription to Politico Pro, but I suppose if you're working in the government and international aid and you're controlling millions, billions of dollars in budget, you might find some need for that. And of course, you'll find the money to pay for it. Politico Pro is enormously expensive. So they highlighted this, and, some, 2-3 dozen subscriptions were needed across the entirety of the organization. Reasonable to believe, right? But of course, the subscription price is too damn high. And even Elon Musk had difficulty believing that the subscription cost was so high. Look at the line item here, thousands of dollars. I think some 40, 80, who knows what, thousands of dollars worth of subscriptions to Politico, which in Trump's telephone game inside his head probably eventually becomes millions, maybe even billions of dollars, but is cast as this is a direct payoff to leftist rags that, Politico, anything but leftist, of course. Rag is, not a bad description, but not leftist, certainly. But how many others are getting paid? And the entire corrupt fake news is getting paid by USAID. They've developed this into a whole scheme that apparently $40,000 or even $80,000 divided among every liberal media outlet in the country. But how much more were they getting? They think they're uncovering, an entire ghost payment system of subsidizing the liberal media when it was 35 people at USAID who signed up for Politico Pro and had the office pay for it. And look, that happens everywhere. That's like a legitimate expense. I think you should probably skip Politico Pro, especially at that price point. But, that's not an illegitimate use of money. But of course, they're going to turn it into one and spin it into something that it's not. That's the latest outrage. I forgot that was what was coming up. All right, let's see. Other things that I saw a New York Times article affirming that Musk allies discuss deploying AI to find budget savings. Right now, it's just a matter of I'm putting everything in a spreadsheet and I'm searching. I'm control-Fing the government away. Search Gaza and eliminate that. Search, I don't know, whatever, DEI and eliminate any of those things. But my concern with the use of AI is my imagining is that they end up downloading all this personal identifying information and using it Cambridge Analytica style to refine their model's ability to predict whether or not people were Trump voters and turn Treasury payments on and off based on the likelihood that you were, in fact, a Trump voter, or maybe even actual information about how you voted if they can get a hold of that. But at least it served as confirmation that processing it through AI, and of course that would likely mean X-branded proprietary AI, whether it's the kind that exists now or something that they develop along the way, is all the more likely. Let's see, other things that I put aside here. I'm going to have to open up some of these things. Well, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking with Greg, the way of slowing the ideas that have been bandied about for slowing things down in the congressional procedure in the legislative branch run into the one problem, that is there needs to be legislation that can be slowed down in order for any of the plans for slowing things down to work. And right now there's no legislation happening. By the way, it has been interesting to see, I think I mentioned this the other day, seeing memos being circulated about how to mess with procedures such that everything is slowed down. And it's interesting to watch, because last time around I wrote those memos and posted those ideas all the time. And this time other people are taking care of the job. So that's fantastic. And I can elevate some of those things. But yes, reminding everybody of all the different, I've seen a couple of different outlines of the many ways that you can slow legislation down, but there's just none really happening, which, limits things. Let me see what the House Democratic Whip notice of the day is. What's up here? I think there's one bill listed for consideration today. H.R. 27, the Halt Fentanyl Act. So, I don't know. And I guess a lot of these things are, of course, titled in ways that are designed to, I guess, discourage people from delaying their passage. Why, that guy delayed the Halt Fentanyl Act, and who doesn't want to halt fentanyl? But literally, there's just nothing going on except that the House and Senate are working towards a budget resolution and some reconciliation bills. And I guess there's some disagreement still between the House and the Senate, and internally even probably in both of those bodies, but more so in the House than others, about how many reconciliation bills they want to put together. And remember, of course, using reconciliation is an end around to avoid the filibuster in the Senate. And you'll recall that there used to be, I guess there still are, but we'll see whether they're waived in the end or just eliminated or ignored, strict rules about what can and can't be considered under a reconciliation framework, because it's not meant to just be a free pass around the filibuster, but people want to use it that way all the time. And Democrats, apparently the fatal flaw for them was they listened to the parliamentarians and said, oh, well, these things are against the rules, so we won't do them. And there's very little reason to believe that the Republicans would do the same. But we'll have to find out. And meanwhile, they're fighting amongst themselves as to whether to do one or two reconciliation bills. And who remembers fights in years past about you can't do two reconciliation bills. You can only do one a year. That's why something, blah, blah, blah. And, they want to have two, so they're doing two. You always could have done two. In some cases, Democrats had, in fact, done two in the past. In some cases, they had done two in the past and denied having done two in the past because they didn't want to do two this time for reasons. So they told everybody you can only do one, even though you said, no, you've done two in the past. You personally have voted for two in the past. Oh, go away. That's not how this works. Or, perhaps more pointedly. That is not how this works! Okay, you don't have to shout. Anyway, yes, so they're fighting over whether to do one big, beautiful bill or two, and it sounds like the preference in the Senate is for two for some reason. Meanwhile, will Trump get his way in the end by forcing them to do one? We're not sure. But one indication comes from Politico, which is, of course, a dirty, rotten, deep state rag, totally subsidized by USAID, but not really. Charlie Mathezian and Calder McHugh write this piece actually about the nominations process chiefly. I think the week Trump finally broke the Senate. Master of the Senate, they're awarding him now, I guess. That's how they start this out. Master of the Senate. The fire hose of news from the White House risks obscuring what ranks as one of President Donald Trump's most stunning feats. This was the week that he finally broke the Senate. What a left-wing rag, huh? Several key GOP Senate holdouts on the nominations of Trump's diciest and most problematic cabinet-level nominees, Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., finally caved this week, greasing the path to confirmation for two politicians who once would have seemed unimaginable for their posts. The moment represented the culmination of a long-running Trump project to bring the Senate to heel. It's an endeavor that began roughly a decade ago when, as a long shot on the campaign trail in Iowa, Trump served notice that no one was off limits, not even a Senate heavyweight like John McCain. Trump's disparagement of McCain's military service and subsequent defiance in the face of calls to apologize was the first signal of his disregard for the institution and its denizens. Since then, he has dished out demeaning nicknames, mocked senators' spouses and parents, and driven their colleagues out of Washington, and that's just in his own party. He has systematically pounded members of the so-called greatest deliberative body on earth into submission, dared those in his party to defy him, and consistently dangled the prospect of MAGA-fueled primary challenges over their heads. The once powerful legislative chamber is now too wizened and shell-shocked to oppose him on anything grander than esoteric points of policy, a place so diminished that senators threaten their own party colleagues with primaries. Even Kennedy's wealthy former running mate felt emboldened to announce recently that she, too, would bankroll Senate primary challenges to those who opposed him. That was one of today's takeaways when, despite his obvious qualms, Senator Todd Young of Indiana said he'd back Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence. Young is no apple polisher by nature. He's a Marine Corps veteran and heir to the hawkish internationalist Hoosier foreign policy legacy of Richard Lugar and Lee Hamilton. I guess not. He hails from an unquestionably red state, but declined to publicly back Trump during the 2024 election. Similarly, Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, a physician and member of the Senate Finance Committee and the chair of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, Pensions Committee, who had admitted to struggling with the vaccine-denying Kennedy's nod as Health and Human Services Secretary, decided to fold today. I guess this would be yesterday or the day before, delivering the key committee vote to recommend his confirmation. A day earlier, another Republican who was on the fence on Gabbard, Susan Collins of Maine, did the same. What it reveals is that under its current Republican majority, Trump is himself the master of the Senate. It's in part because of his application of smash-mouth politics, but also because of under his watchful eye, his most obsequious Senate allies have willingly handed over power. Consider Senator Tommy Tuberville, a Trump loyalist who warned members of his own GOP conference in November that, quote, "we're going to try to get you out of the Senate if they cast any votes against Trump's nominees and legislative agenda. President Trump and J.D. Vance are going to be running the Senate," he said, not long after the November election. It's a view that's at odds with Senate history and the Federalist Papers, of course. Some of the most ambitious presidents in our history have been vexed by the chamber's obstinance, including from members of their own parties. In 2009, President Barack Obama rode into office accompanied by a 60-vote Democratic majority in the Senate, but as he tried to pass progressive health care legislation, he was stonewalled by multiple senators from his own party. Their opposition to any version of the Affordable Care Act that included a public option stalled Obama's momentum during his first year in office, led to a protracted fight over health care, and contributed to a sense of dysfunction that resulted in huge Democratic losses during the 2010 midterms. In his first term, Trump learned the hard way in 2017 how seriously the Senate took its power to check the president when he tried to force through an ACA repeal that blew up after 3 Republicans bucked him, symbolized by a very public thumbs down from McCain. You getting the idea? Well, The Gabbard and Kennedy nominations aren't guaranteed, but it increasingly looks like they'll be confirmed. And if so, it's an unconditional surrender that's both a testament to Trump's application of hard and soft political power to a body that once took pride in resisting it, and to the extreme polarization that courses through Washington. Besides that, I'll jump out from the article there and add that they seem to be worried not at all about losing the power of the purse. Not to Donald Trump, but to Elon Musk, amazingly enough, and are rolling over for that. Not a big deal. I'm sure they think they can take it back anytime they want to. Right. All right. Well, that's it for today. We can't cram in anything else, although I will. Let's see if I can cram in. Did you see the story? We'll just do it this way. You see the story about the dismissal of the commandant. We read about the dismissal of the commandant of the Coast Guard the other day, the first woman admiral to head the Coast Guard, ousted by Trump more or less because she was a woman, and so therefore I guess actually paid attention to DEI stuff, so he's blaming that for it. Well, anyway, having removed her, she was given by the Coast Guard 60 days to, wrap things up in the office, and of course she gets an official residence on base at the Bowling Anacostia base, which is, by the way, where that helicopter was headed when it crashed into the American Airlines flight the other day. But at any rate, she's got housing on base there, and they said, well, how about 60 days to wrap things up, move on out of there, and put the new commandant in there. Apparently, the new commandant was just ordered by Donald Trump. Kick her out. And I mean today. They gave her 3 hours. You get out of there today, or else. She left everything she owned behind. She did not have time to pack. Kicked out. Because she's a woman. Sure, why not?
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with Waldman.
Really rather remarkable and covered by NBC News admirably. I'll share that story with you, and perhaps we can discuss it a little more at length tomorrow, Friday, another roundup day. Thanks for listening here. It's now time to hand things over to Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. What could we have possibly missed? Well, a good hour's solid worth of stories coming up next.